Okay, moving on to the next presentation. The subject has kind of already been brought up, the whole idea of live testing. And what we are going to talk about this morning is the rollout of a program in Saskatchewan. We've gotten an approved test that we can work with to start. We now have funding in place through our agricultural funding program. There was a program called Adopt, which allows us to take technology basically out of laboratories and put them into the field. And we fit this to a T, I think. We tried to get on this a couple of years ago and it has not succeeded. We reapplied with a little different package, and I think we got a better plan. So what we are going to do this morning, I'm going to get Brian Zwaan from Prairie Diagnostics to come up and explain how the mechanisms of this are going to work, and then hopefully answer a lot of questions. This is one where I may be a participant and answer a bunch of questions too, because I've had quite a bit of hand in on getting this project to where it's at. So with that, I'll let Brian take over and give his presentation.
Thanks, Harvey. So thank you for inviting me to this event. There's a great turnout that we see here. I heard there's over 60 interested people here today to gain an understanding for where we are at with CWD testing. It is confusing. I think Glenn did a great job of illustrating how technical this is. It's not a clear answer. There's a lot of unknowns that the disease has in face of us right now. And from a diagnostic side and from a testing side, what can we do to bring testing, in particular live animal, to change the whole spectrum in the environment of what we're seeing now in the cervid industry, away from post-mortem. So that's sort of the overview that I would like to do with the test that we're going to be presenting here. I've got one of my cohorts with me from the lab. I got Dr. Dale Godson with me as well. Dale's the virologist in the lab and is also responsible for taking a look at all of the CWD test results and resulting them. So let's just see if this thing will move. Might have to do it manually, and that's all right. I think one of the things to keep in mind is it's a very exciting time right now for the industry. As we're moving forward here and taking a look at the various test results that are going to be available to us. So in the past, we've been using a lot of the, it's been post-mortem. We need the brain. We need to be able to take a look at it. We're looking at IHC. There's a number of the different test types up at the top that we can take a look at. IHC has been the primary one that we're using right now. The excitement is certainly coming in with this amplification testing that's on the horizon. It's still very much in the research stage. It's not available, or it's not in a position to be used commercially yet. And I'll try to spend a little bit of time and just explain some of the differences that we're seeing and why commercially we're not able to offer some of these other options that certainly, as we're looking in the research world, they're very exciting, and they're something that we're going to be able to move forward to in the meantime. So the reference lab. All right. So one of the things with the reference lab, I think it's important to recognize that there's a little bit of a difference between research labs and the reference labs that we're using. So PDS, for example, we're a fully accredited lab, whether at a national level, through Standards Council of Canada, international levels with ISO testing. We're also got accreditation with the American Association of Veterinary Lab Diagnostics. So it's another. It's just demonstrating the level that we have to go through to ensure that we're able to produce accurate, repeatable results to the clients. And that's one of the differences that we're seeing with, difference between a research lab typically and a commercial lab is that level of accreditation that's being done. So from when we receive an animal right on through until we result that the test out, there are a series of procedures that we have to adhere to. So training, the lab protocol itself that's been developed in the research thing, then brought to us, that it's done every single time. The validation of that test, that somebody sends us, CFI sends us a panel and says, we need you to result this. We have to be able to give the results that they're showing. And we do this on a routine basis. That's part of the accreditation that comes in with the labs. So with that, it's important to know that CFIA have just recently recognized RAML testing as a herd screening. So this is a relatively new movement on the regulatory board side. So I have put the link down on the bottom. If you go to the CFIA site, you'll be able to pull up and read in some more detail. But I think the key point of this RAML testing that they're having here is that you have the opportunity now individually, voluntarily, to take a look at this rectoanal mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. I'm just going to refer to that further as we move on to the thing as just a RAML test that we're going to be doing. It's an approved test. It's a recognized test by CFIA. They've generated or put together the test protocol, and they present it to the labs, and that's what we're using, and we're recognized, certified by CFIA to do that test for you. So we don't see this very much anymore. Certainly not in the farm cervids. In the wild situation, we may see this very relatively often, but we're not seeing this level of disease progression on the farm cervids. Primarily because we're picking it up very early. We all know the standard procedure right now. Every animal that gets killed, heads have to be submitted to the lab. They're all coming into PDS. We take those looks. If we find some of the prions into the obex, and this is a situation where we're seeing some very early infection that's going on, this animal is positive. We've got a visualization of it. We can see it. As the disease progresses, it starts to infect the entire obex. And this is really where some of the challenge is coming is, right now the gold standard is to catch it as early as we possibly can. We know we can do that with an obex. We know that the prions are collecting in those tissues at that early stage. We could pick it up. When we get down to a very acute case, it's released in everything. Semen, urine, blood, it's in all the tissues. Feces, and it's easy to detect. And it comes back a little bit to the question that needs to be answered and say, well, why aren't we using the RT Quick or some of these other amplification type testing? Is where in here are they starting to show up in the progression of the disease? And that's where some of the, we haven't got clear indication yet of exactly where that happens. So we've got it early on from picking up the disease. We know that it gets into the tonsils. We know it gets into the retropharyngeal lymph glands on these animals on a fairly early stage. And then it starts to progress on. We also know it's picking up in these rectal mucosa tissues relatively early on. Well, when does it start getting picked up by the feces, in the urine, in the velvet? Certainly when we get to this stage, we know it's there, but that's too late. We need to pick it up much earlier. So this test that we've got, the Rammel test, it's a difficult test to do, and it's difficult because we need to get the right sample at this point in time. So the rectal test that we have here, if this is the anus, the picture that we're looking at, just to give you a little bit of some markers, there's the anus. We've cut it and we've laid it open. Okay, so that's what we're looking at in this picture. So there's the rectum there, and we're moving down through into the intestine, so through there. This is the zone where those lymphoid tissues that Glenn was talking about starts to collect. So if we're going to be able to detect the tissue now, we know we have to have this range of tissue that we need to have trained veterinarians to be picking up on. The lymphoid tissue right now with this Rammel, when we compare it back against Obex, it's 80%. So it's a very high correlation. It's not 100%, it's 80%. That's part of the reason why at this stage, part of the game, CFIA are not prepared to say we're accepting Rammel testing as an antemortem to say this is a positive, because they haven't had a high enough correlation at this point in time. As they've looked at the progression of the disease through the animal, this is one of the tissue types that we can take a look at that we know that will get very early detection. Maybe not quite as early as Obex, but still very early detection. And I think it's going to be the using of this disease, or this test, is where the industry is going to be able to move forward and leverage this test for use, whether it's in breeding, animal selection processes, whether it's with the meat and the velvet people. If they've got this test behind them, is the industry, the cervid industry, going to be able to leverage that forward against some of their suppliers and say, this is good enough? Or they're going to accept, yeah, that's a good enough test for us, we're going to be happy with saying that this is the negative herd. Those are all things that need to be decided by the industry. And those will be how this test is going to be used, and how you can leverage this test within the industry is yet to be determined. So I'm just going to give you a quick run through of what the test is. It's a speculum that's inserted into the rectum. Sorry that I've used a sheep in this case, just because I was able to find a good scrapey case showing the veterinarians going in there to collect this test. This is where they're going in to be able to go to this is what's creating the difficulty in collecting this Rammel tissue. It's a little bit of a tough area to go into. It just needs some practice. We need to get some veterinarians out there that are skilled in being able to do this. So as we've taken a look at this site now, this is what we're seeing histologically. So, and again, as we're looking at this slide, we've got the epithelium up along the top here. So that tissue that we laid on here, the first layer that we're looking at is the epithelium. Okay? Then we're going to go into the next layer, which is the follicles. So we can start to see the follicle development in underneath. So we got the epithelium. Then we got just immediately underneath that epithelium, is where the follicles will start to, and then we've got the rest of the connective tissue that builds up the alimentary canal. So connective tissue, the lymphoid tissue, and the epithelium. So we've all got a good setting of where we're looking at. We have to have follicles in order to, because this is where the prions are collecting. So if the veterinarians are going in there and are not able to get that sample to us with follicles into it, we can't result. It's inconclusive. And we need to have 5 or 6 follicles in order to be able to result using the IHC testing methods that's available right now. So this is what a follicle would take a look like right now. So we're visually seeing prions that are collecting into the follicles. The question really comes back down to, in the testing side, is this. What does it mean? Well, a positive is easy, right? We can see it. Positive is positive. We know we've got a result. And that's the same thing even with the RT Quick and some of these new tests that are coming. If it's positive, no problem. We've got a problem. But what if it's negative? What did that mean? Does that mean that we got a sample in that had the lymph nodes in it? When we do the IHC, we're visually taking a look at that. They're counting. They're saying, yeah, we've got 5, 6 or more lymph nodes in there. So that we know we've got tissue that's where the prions are collecting in, and they can then visually see it. If we've done an RT Quick or a PCR or some of these new amplification type techniques that are coming around, all we know when we got a negative test is, well, is it negative? Or did we not have any lymphoid tissue in that sample? So until we know that we're routinely getting the right type of tissue and the right sampling coming into it from our veterinarian field, this is always going to be a concern. So when we talk about the regulatory side and the CFIA, you know, they're not moving forward with it at this point in time. There are some stumbling blocks in place that is preventing them from being able to say, we're stepping up and we're going to go out on the limb and say, we're going to take RT Quick, we're going to start using that as the next antemortem testing. And again, where in the progression of the disease is any of the other tissues that we're going to be sampling start demonstrating that they've got prions into it? We know at the one end, that's easy, it's that one closest to when they're collecting in the OBEX. And that's where the research world is right now, is taking a look at. Once we start collecting more and more data and comparing against the gold standard of an OBEX and say, you know what, we've got RIMALs right now that are at 80% is what the number is what they look at. That's based on, you know, the few samples that they've taken a look at. We have a good understanding of where that disease is progressing through the body. As we do more and more of them, and we're comparing OBEX against more RAMALs, that number may change a little bit. And at the same time, we may start to see some research may come up and be able to indicate, say, well, here's a better test or a better tissue type that we can test for. Maybe it's feces. If it's urine, that'll be difficult to collect. If it's blood, at what stage of the early onset of disease is what we're dealing with. The other aspect to the gene testing or to the testing program that we're going to be offering is for gene sequencing. So we know now that CWD has been with the LL and the MM gene types that are available to it, that we can get some. I'm going to use some a little bit different terminology than what Glenn was using. I'm going to go refer it back to some of the crop production side of the world that I'm going to be looking at, and I'm going to call it tolerant. And I'm going to use the analogy of Roundup Ready. We're all familiar with that? Roundup Ready is not resistant. It's Roundup Ready tolerant. So what does that mean? So they bred some tolerance into the herbicide, the canola plants, which means that I can spray it up to 1 liter an acre of Roundup and it'll survive. Everything else likely in that small seedling stage is going to die at the same time. But if I bump the rate up to 1.5 liters to 3 liters an acre to the full rate of Roundup, Roundup Ready canola dies, right? The gene sequencing that we're looking at, and we're talking about these LL resistant, I'm going to say it's LL tolerant, it's CWD tolerant genes that they have, because they're going to die from it. They're not resistant to CWD, but they are tolerant to some level of it. And so consider that. So the testing that we're going to be having as we're moving forward is that we're working on validating some of the existing genotype testing for elk and deer, for the L and the M genotyping, and we will be able to. be bringing that up to, for testing as well. So that brings us now to the last little part here. I just wanted to let everybody know with this Ramalt collection program that we got approval from the Saskatchewan Ministry. So it is an adopt, as Harvey had indicated. It's a means of taking technology from the lab and moving it into the field. And with that concept, we took it in as what's the technology that we need to get into the field? It's the collection of this tissue. If we can't get the right tissues collected in on a regular basis and have a high accuracy or high level of accuracy of having the correct tissue presented to the lab, we're not going to be able to make this Ramalt test work for us. And it is not uncommon. We've had some of the testing that's done in the past where we've had as high as 50% of the tissues that were presented to us didn't have enough lymph nodes into them. And so we weren't able to result. We just be able to come back and say it's inconclusive. We get 3 lymph nodes, we see a little bit of CWD into it, it's not enough. Or if we get 3 lymph nodes and there's nothing into it, we still can't result it. Okay, so it's some of those functions that have to be put in place so that we can provide those accurate, repeatable results that we can trust on. And that's the value that a diagnostic lab has to be able to run on. Okay? So what we've got is a 3-year program. We're going to be taking some veterinarians, identifying, we're going to run them through a program so that they can gain some efficiency in being able to collect this tissue. It is not a hard tissue, and Nick will agree to that. It's once you've had an opportunity to try it and work on a number of animals, you'll gain some proficiency on it. I'm going to argue it is very similar to preg checking in cattle. You can get a new vet that's out that hasn't had a lot of experience doing some preg checking, and their accuracy, might be down around 75 or 80%. You give them 1,000 or 2,000 or 10,000 head that they've had their hand up the butts on, and suddenly they're at 95 and 98% accuracy. It's practice, it's a technique that needs to be learned. So we need to get that opportunity into the hands of some veterinarians that are going to be wanting to work with the cervid industry to be able to have this experience. And so that's where the ADOPT program is coming from. That's where the money is going to be initially presented to. It's over a 3-year program. We're going to have vets come in, they're going to be trained, they're going to be mentored. There's the testing is going to be done gratis for those producers that are involved with it. And in the 2nd and 3rd year that will be going forward with, it'll be again testing that's going on, but you'll now be able to go as a producer, and if you're involved in the program, saying, I'm going to get Dr. Davis to come out and do the check. He did the certification program. He's available, he's good, he can do it similar to a management program like we do with preg checking. Preg checking costs $7 to $10 a head to get done. And he'll be the same sort of an offering that they'll be able to offer with Ramalt. I'll come out and I'll do the Ramalt testing at whatever value that it is. The testing is over and above that, of course. But if you're involved in the program, testing is going to be included in the program. So with that, I'll open it up to some questions. And I say I've got Dale and Harvey here to help finish answering any of the ones. Now we have.
Hey, can we go to your...
Okay, we'll start with this question back here. He's got a microphone already.
Can you go back to your description of resistant or tolerant of, and give us a definition of what you say an ARR sheep is compared to scabies versus what you're thinking in cervids versus CWD?
So you're going to have to help me out here a little bit. So what's an ARR sheep?
Well, we read ARR sheep to get rid of scabies. Now we're going to breed.
And are they completely resistant to scabies, or could they come up with the disease?
They're Roundup.
Is it?
Roundup tolerant.
Okay, so Glenn's saying that it's Roundup tolerant. So what it means?
Same concept.
So it's the same concept. So what the Roundup, the tolerant concept that I'm talking about here is, And I'll just clarify this a little bit. Last year when I was here, I got the sense in some number of producers I talked to, when we were talking resistance, everybody was thinking resistant, that they will not get the disease, period. That's not what, that's what resistance is. Resistance is you don't get the disease. Tolerance, I'll just work my thought through and then we can debate it a little bit. The tolerance side of it is, and I'm bringing this from the crop side, because they bred tolerance into a number of our crops. And I'm going to use canola as that example. It is tolerant or resistant at low levels to a dose of Roundup. If you increase that dose or you increase the challenge of it, it will kill it. Same sort of a thing is ending up happening with CWD, with the prion. If it's infected with it, at a low rate, it's tolerant for a longer period of time. And then it's going to start to demonstrate the disease. It will die of the disease in the end, I guess, is what I'm suggesting. Nick had a comment he would like to.
So I'll just say I like the concept of tolerance. And I think a lot of time is spent on defining what resistance or tolerance or susceptibility is. In my mind, if you have a water-resistant watch, and I'll have this slide, it's not waterproof, right? So when you think of resistance, I mean, I want you to think of a water-resistant watch, and it's along the lines of your definition of tolerant.
Does that answer question close enough?
Yeah. Glenn, then Blaine.
So you mentioned that some of the problems associated with getting a test is whether or not you have follicles there. And you also mentioned that the success rate of the test was about 80%. And I'm wondering whether or not the 20% that you're talking about there includes cases where it's been difficult to get accurate representation of the follicles, or is the 80% just looking at cases where you know you've got the full array of follicles there to look at?
The comparison that's been is against the gold standard. So if I had an Obex positive, what am I getting on my RAML? And 80% of the time, I'm getting a RAML positive as well.
Yeah.
So they're not looking at the negatives, saying, okay, if I've got a negative Obex, or what I perceive as a negative Obex, what am I seeing on the RT or the RAML?
Okay, Blaine?
Didn't answer the question though. He asked, that 80%, is that based on looking at the lymph follicle?
It's yes, because that's the only way you can test. That's the only way you can test it, right? At this point in time, with the RAML test, what they've considered as a recognized positive is what I demonstrated with the tissue. So you've got enough lymph nodes that are there, and that visually we can see the accumulation of the.
You got an explanation, more better explanation there?
Yeah, I think I can more directly answer your question, Glenn. Those 20%
Yeah.
are usually in an earlier stage of disease.
Okay.
So if we grade the Obex,
Yeah.
those animals are either Obex negative or stage 1, perhaps. That's where those 20% that are rectal biopsy negative wind up being.
Got it.
We're hoping to catch a variety of animals through this. There'll be some that are going to be just on the farm that are going to stay, but there are some that will be sent to slaughter, and we'll be able to do comparatives against those ones.
Dale, did you want to add anything? I'll just get my cohort here. Was there any clarification that you wanted to make?
No, I think Nick's the one that's done the comparisons.
Okay, Blaine?
Okay, so we've had this discussion, and just want to bring the room up to speed. And I'll agree with Dr. Haley on the assessment that government is a major part of this. Slowness in developing a live test. We keep being told that we need 100% before we can do it. There isn't any lab that will tell you that a test they use is 100%. Not one. Yet we've got government telling us we have to have a test that's 100% before they'll stand behind it. obviously we need to have the best standard we can possibly have. And finally, we see some participation from the provincial government on funds coming in. I'd like to thank everybody for their work on making this happen. But my fear is this. I destroyed 2 animals on a TB scare a couple years back because they were reactors over and above the skid test, so we had to put them down into a culture. We all knew that they weren't going to be positive, but it still had to be done that way because the test is not 100%. All right? And the training of the vets and herds, it definitely has to be done, and it is a priority. But if we're not going to validate that test on 100 or 80% or 100% or whatever, first, we run the risk of, at the end of 3 years, another 3 years down the road, more herds depopulated, more infection in the wild, whatever. We run the risk of CFIA, the God that sits in the sky, saying, sorry, you only have a 90%. It's not good enough. We have the ability to take complete and total rectums from slaughtered animals, over 3,000 a year, okay, in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Take those into the lab where there's no doubt that we're going to get the proper sample, and run that, because every one of those tests coming out of the federal plant, intestines coming out of the federal plant, has an OBEX to run against. So we could then do the test, the vault test, against the result from the OBEX and say to CFIA, now we know, there isn't any question, now we know we have this percentage. Shall we proceed to indemnify our vets? We're going to spend another 3 years, and thank you for your work, but we're going to spend another 3 years and get nowhere.
I disagree that we're not going to get anywhere. The reality with, and Dale, please step in at any time. The reality that we have with all of our infectious disease, and Betty, if you would like to step in, so we've got our Chief Veterinary Officer in the room as well, Dr. Betty Althouse. I'll give you my view, and then it may get expanded from that. But with reportable diseases, we have to, in order to protect our international customers, we've had to come up to a certain level that's accepted internationally. And nothing, you're right, Blaine, nothing is 100%. It's what's the best test that we have right now to do it. At this point in time, it's an OBEX. With an OBEX, that's as early as we've got. There is some information or some research that are showing that potentially the RT Quick may be even more sensitive coming down the road. Once though we fully understand the progression of the disease from first infection right through to an acute stage, and at what point in time will where are those tissues that we need to be able to collect to be able to identify really early onset of infection is the question that we're dealing with right now. And that answer has not been, we don't have. It needs to come. It will come. I think we're looking at a point in time that will, but in the meantime, in our regulatory bodies, in order to protect our industry, and it's not only in the cervid industry that they take the same process, it's across the board. Grains, all the other species, the same sort of an issue that has to be put in place. They need to know what's accepted by the rest of the international world and say, we'll take it to that level. We're ready and open to grow that and pick up better tests as they are proven to become available. But that's the question, the state that we're at. They need to be proven. So the ramals, we know, for example, and you're right, Blaine, is that we need to start collecting those ramals so that we can more frequently compare the ramal tissue against that gold standard OBEX. CFIA at the moment, you know, they take everything from the head up. They don't collect very many tissues anymore from the rest of them. They did initially on so that they could gain an understanding of the progression of that disease through, and from that understanding, they recognize the OBEX is the test that we need right now. We can, doing what Blaine is suggesting, is collecting positive OBEX and grabbing their rectal mucosa and being able to compare it again. Right now, the information is that it's about 80%. Who knows? Maybe it'll come up and it'll be a higher rate, and it could prove to become more of an industry standard that regulatory people will be able to accept.
But wouldn't taking the samples from the slaughtered animals increase your sample size for your three-year study
And
versus
we're
all live animals? Because then you've got that OBEX test too.
And in Saskatchewan, we're starting to do that. So for example, in Blaine's territory, say when all his animals were put down, we collected all 69 of the rectums from those as well.
So then what about the rest of us sending in our heads? Is this something that's coming down the pipe?
What we're looking at doing privately, if you will, is grabbing all those rectals so that we've got them and storing them at the moment so that we can take them and compare them back.
And then just one last question, just because my ignorance about sample size and quality of tests. So then let's just say whether it's the federal animals or what you would already propose, you've gone into this study, you've done live animals. Now at 80%, is that something that would qualify, or now are these herds going to have to be retested because the 20% that got missed were earlier in the disease? So then do you have to have double samples of the herd to get it up to some standard that would be accepted by government?
That's a regulatory question.
I'm going to elaborate a little bit on this one, because what is going to happen out of this is that I hate to use these words, but it's always numbers and statistics.
Yeah.
Okay, and the farther we get into this and the more numbers we generate, we're going to know what this correlation is, if it's 80% or whatever. Okay, then we take those numbers back to the people who do epidemiology and statistics, and they say, okay, when I test, I've got 100 animals on my farm and I've tested them this year. What does that mean? And then what we're going to come up with at some point in time is to say, okay, you tested 100 animals this year, you tested the same 100 next year, you tested them for 3 years or 3 intervals, and at that point in time we can say that there is not evidence to suggest that there is disease in the herd. And the first thing that we have to be clear on is that this kind of a test is not going to clear any one individual animal, but it is going to get a herd. And probably the most important thing, that's the first step that it's going to be able to do, it's going to give us some confidence in moving animals even from farm to farm within our province. We may not get this to a point where it's accepted nationally or internationally, but at least we can do business amongst ourselves to start with. Or the next step will be, I've tested 3 years and I've got this data. I want to ship 60 bulls.
I gotta change my battery.
Okay.
All right, you're good to go.
Okay, to finish that thought, the next step will be, I've got a semi-load of bulls that I want to ship from here to Alberta, to Ontario, and currently certain people will qualify for this to go and certain people are going to have problems. And we're going to come up with and say, okay, I've got animals that are, that have a clean test on them. Can I ship them through your province? Because the realities that we're going to face with this is that over time is that people are going to keep building walls around us and they're going to say, you're not moving this stuff out of Saskatchewan unless it's dead.
We can't even move slaughter animals.
Pardon me?
We can't even move live animals to slaughter.
Yeah.
Well, without a permit.
No. Right now, to get a slaughter animal into Alberta, okay, you have to apply for a permit. if the herd is not certified.
Yeah.
You have to apply for a permit, and then they will decide if they will let you collar that animal, radio tag it, whatever, and bring it in. And that's in a province that has over 1,000 wild positives between us and the slaughter plant.
I would encourage, at this point with this RAML test that's coming, is how is yourselves as an industry would you make use of it? So for example, if you're repopulating and you're buying does in, are you gonna buy does in without a test? I don't know about you, but I would argue that I would come to somebody and say, I want a genotype and a RAML test before I'll purchase that doe from you for that price, but I want a RAML and a genotype test on that animal before I take it to my property.
I just want to say that that's a higher level of confidence than you have right now, right? The test isn't perfect, it's 80% at best, and it would be great to have a perfect test, but it gives you a higher level of confidence than we have right now.
80% more than we know today.
And that's important, and when you have these discussions with people outside of the industry, it very quickly devolves into, well, people shouldn't be deer farming or elk farming. And I think that, that's not productive. We have a test that offers some level of confidence above what we have already.
Okay, I'll field one more question because we got to kind of keep things moving, and then we'll have a quick refreshment break.
How do you get signed up for this RAML program? Like, you got 3 years.
I guess the first part of this, as you said, it's in the training of the veterinarians, and then there is budget for what 400 samples. Yeah, somewhere we're going to be able to do about 400 or 500 samples with this one. We've had some people that have stepped forward and said, I'd like to work with this. They're ones that I would consider to be high-risk herds. They've either had CWD on their farm already, or they have active CWD right now and they're operating as positive herds. So those are the ones that we're going to.
But the thing to remember on this program is that the goal is to make sure that we can get some veterinarians out there and work on live animals enough so that they can get good technique developed, so that when you phone up the local veterinarian that's got this training, you can say, I want to start implementing in part of my herd health doing some RAML testing. How much are you going to charge me to come out and do it? You've got somebody that is skilled at it, is going to be able to come out, give you a certain price. If he comes on your local veterinarian who's not been exposed to it and say, I want to do it, he's going to say, I charge $300 an hour, we'll see how many we can get through in an hour. Right? That's the way herd health, preg checking used to be. Preg checking is not like that anymore. Preg checking is a management tool that the veterinarian offers to the producer. And that's ultimately, I think, where I would encourage you to think of how you're going to be able to be using this test. First step, of course, is that we need to make sure that we've got some veterinarians that are going to be able to come out and efficiently do this. Not like in Texas where there's one vet. It's got the guy that does thousands and thousands a head, right? We need to have, I would love to see 6 to 12 veterinarians in the province that are skilled in this.
Okay, that's the quick question, and then we'll break for refreshment.
We might have a bigger bang for a buck if we're doing slaughtered animals.
The reality right now is that this ADOPT program, with any granting process that you apply based on this, and the committee that takes a look at it and says, yes, that's taking the technology from the research and putting it into the field. We'll grant you money for that. Not, oh, maybe we can add this and this and this and this on it. Those will be extra things, not to say that we can't, and we can't ask for those monies for some of those, but this is what we got the money for now.
Okay.
Sorry, if I might.
Okay, Betty gets priority over coffee.
Okay, I'm coffee. So it's available as a fee for service as well outside the program. So if you're not part of the program, you can still do it. I guess, and CFIA did a notice to industry March 15th that talks about RAML testing, and that PDS and AHL in Ontario are approved to do the test. They also outlined their policy, so they will consider any animal that's a RAM-mulch positive as a suspicious animal. They will order the animal destroyed and test it for CWD to confirm it. So just so you know, I asked if that would apply to any herd, even if they're already under provincial controls and a positive herd for CWD, and they said yes. So if you do the RAM-mulch testing, it's positive, CFIA will destroy that animal and pay compensation.
And just to further that, and I got clarification from Alex McIsaac on this, on that point, is that the compensation is only on that index animal if you're not in a VHCP herd. If you come back and find 3 more animals, you're on your own. If you're in VHCP, then the procedures for VHCP take over from there.
What's VHCP?
Voluntary Herd Certification Program.
So
Okay.
we're gonna be here all day, so we can ask questions.
Yeah, they're gonna be here all day, so.